Got a question from our buddy in the UK, Josh. He's 21 years old, and essentially he wants to get some information on like how I became a jiu-jitsu coach and how I started doing this full time. I assume for his own, reasoning so that he can become a coach someday. And so I'll read his questions. He's got a few of them, and we'll try to break them down each bit by bit. So he says, I'm 21 from the UK. I was just wondering, when you started training, did you have another job while you were training? The next section of it says, I'm asking because working full-time and being able to train is tricky. And how did you end up teaching? And the last little bit that he asks is, do you think that if I stick with it, then maybe in a few years when I'm a purple belt, I'll be able to teach as a job? How hard was it for you to start teaching or working as a coach? And so again, it says, thanks, Josh. So first off, Josh, let's break your question down into chunks, right? So did I have a job while I was training? Absolutely. And sometimes I was working 40 to 6 hours a week, and I would still come in and train, 2 to 3 hours a night. And when, in fact, with working, as soon as I would, go to a job interview, right, I would go in there and I would let them know, say, listen, I'll work really hard for you. I'll do whatever you ask me to do, but I have to have this time and this time, or, at least some of these times available so I can train. And if they couldn't accommodate that with the work schedule, I simply just didn't do it, right? And I kind of always kept that, in the front of my mind, that no matter what I was doing in life, I always wanted to train. I'm not that materialistic of a person. I don't really need a lot of stuff. So I wanted to always keep training there. And so that was something I never compromised on. And this is true not just with work, but relationships with significant others. I've sacrificed plenty of relationships in, the need for my training to be still go, right? And so again, people don't understand it sometimes, but it's like I knew that I was doing something with it. I was just like, I'm not going to compromise in that. I'm sorry, right? Sorry, a little tangent there in the relationships, but that happens especially for young guys. The next question that you asked, Josh, is you're working full time and you're wondering, how did I get my start in teaching? Well, and I started teaching when I was a blue belt, at least at some degree. And then when I started to really teach on a regular basis was in 2008. One of our coaches that was here, he taught a Wednesday no-gi class and he was leaving. And so this little spot opened up. And I didn't really go into teaching initially because I thought that I was supposed to be the coach. It was actually because I was listening to a podcast with a black belt who said that if you teach jiu-jitsu, you get better at it, right? It makes your jiu-jitsu much better because you're dissecting techniques and you're learning how they work and why they work instead of simply just doing them. And they were absolutely right. When I started teaching, I started getting a better in-depth knowledge of what's going on. And I remembered those things so much better. And I started to get questions from the students where they would say, hey, why do we do this? And I wouldn't have a really good answer for them. So I'd have to go back and really research and dig down and think about why do I do some of the things that I'm doing? And so that made my jiu-jitsu so much better because I had to basically chew it up. I had to mama bird it, right? I had to make it digestible to someone else. And when you can take something that's super complex and then break it down into simple terms, it's very valuable for your training. The last question sort of that you get into, and I think this is the one we'll probably rattle on the most about, is basically, do I think that if you stick with it, that maybe in a few years as a purple belt, you can teach as a job? Maybe. And then you said, how hard was it for me to work as a coach or get started as a coach? So here's a big thing I would think about. Don't let coaching be your biggest, your only goal. Right? Let it be out there somewhere, but that's a far off goal. Teaching as a job, okay? Right now, you need to focus on you. You need to focus on your development and your consumption of jiu-jitsu and building yourself up. When I started teaching, that was not something I looked forward to. When I got my full-time teaching job in 2009 as the head coach, it was kind of terrifying for me because for me, when I came into jiu-jitsu, I had goals and dreams, aspirations. I had things that I wanted. And then now these people were coming in and they were looking to me as the coach to guide them through this stuff. And so their dreams, goals, aspirations were sitting nicely on my shoulders. And that was, for me, it was a bit of a burden. And so it freaked me out at first. And when we did our first couple of tournaments, I would wake up in the morning and my stomach would be turning in knots I was getting ready to compete, but it was my students. And it was super nerve-wracking because I didn't want to let them down. And so I worked really hard to prepare them and get them ready and things like that. And they did well, and so it was okay. I started doing this in 2010 as a full-time job. It was just one of these weird things, man, where we had just finished a seminar and then all the guys went out for some beers and celebrated one of our buddies' birthdays. It was an amazing day and I was so stoked. And then I was driving home at about 2 a.m. and I realized that I had to get up at work at 6. And I was so bummed. It was going to be I had to get up work at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And I was super bummed about it. And so I had this flash in my mind, right, where it was just listen, pull over. And so I pulled over into a parking lot and I started figuring out the numbers. I called my buddy up, and again, I said, hey, listen, can you give me this amount? This will be the amount that I need to just to live on, right? Nothing more, just enough to get by, and I'll figure out where the other money's going to come. I don't know where it's going to come, but I'll figure it out. And he said, yeah, we can do that. And so that was in March. I did the full-time job part of it in June. And from there, it just kept going. Now, one thing that you want to, don't mistake this, because I used to dream about doing jiu-jitsu. Oh man, I'm just going to train, and I'm just going to do this stuff, and there's not going to be any work involved. It's going to be fun, When you start teaching jiu-jitsu, when you start doing this as a business and as a job, it's still fun. It's rewarding. It's a beautiful thing, right? I think it's a beautiful profession to be able to give to people to see them develop, but it's a lot of work, man. And if anybody who knows me very well, they know the amount of hours that I put in. I recently put up a video where I was talking about I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and it was already 9 at night. And again, man, I'm working my butt off. And again, it's not just for me personally, but I want to build up the people around me, because again, as a leader, I've heard the analogy, and I like this analogy, of the sun being the leader, right? The sun shoots this energy, these rays, right, on the planet, and these rays of light give us life, right? Like they make plants grow, they give us energy ourselves, they make us produce vitamin D, they do all these different things. And if it wasn't for that sun being there would be no life. Make sense? And so for you as a coach, you've got to be able to fill your cup up to the brim, so you're overflowing, so that when you start to give it out to people, you don't completely empty yourself. Because again, if your cup's half full and you're starting to give out to people, because essentially as a coach, man, you're giving your life force away. Because it's not like you're not doing random stuff. You're physically doing stuff, right? Like my body from coaching is not the same, because I've been through a lot of training to help other people get ready for things. And again, that's literally taking bits and pieces of my body away. And I know that's a weird thing to think about, but it is, right? Like my body's the amount of training and the teaching and all that stuff that I do, it has altered the way that my body is at this point. So that's a big thing. And so you got to think about all the stuff that you're going to be doing, all the things that you're going to be giving away to these people, and you got to be ready for that, because that's what a good leader does. And so when you get into it, first, think about consumption and development in your own personal growth first. Go through all the rigors, like learn how to balance work and training. Go through the struggle of balancing a relationship with the training. Go through, injuries. Go through competitions where you get smashed and then you come back and you win. Do all the things that you can and experience as much as you can. So this way, when you finally have an opportunity that presents itself to where you can teach, then you can say, hey, listen, I've been through all this stuff, at least to some degree, and you can guide people through it, because that's your job, right? At that point, that's going to be your job to help people through it. Now, as far as how to get started teaching, again, once you're like a blue belt or something like that, you can probably help teach in some degree, maybe with some beginners. And something I would say, and this is my advice, people don't like doing this very often, at least in the beginning, is teach kids. And the reason I say teach kids is because a lot of people, first off, they think it's like underneath them. They don't want to do it. And it's a challenge, man. Teaching kids is a challenge. But it teaches you to be really creative, and it even helps you be entertaining. Because if you're not entertaining, right? Like if you're not like fun to watch and fun to be around, the kids know too. The kids will be like, oh, this guy's boring. And they'll start to like zone out, and you'll realize it. Like I know when I'm off, when the kids aren't paying attention, and I know when I'm on, when I can talk and I've got all their attention, right? And I can keep them going and keep them motivated. And so that's a great thing. And plus, if you can take a really complex move and break it down to a simple move, a simple way to teach them, that's so valuable, because then you can take that same idea over to your training with adults, and it's incredibly valuable again. So I would advise you to start teaching kids. And again, just talk to your coaches and let them know that, say, hey, at some point I'd like to teach. If you ever have a spot open when you think I'm ready, I'd love to help out. So again, I could kind of rattle off about this, but this is kind of the way that I got into it, man. But again, my big advice to you would be to sort of let the teaching idea go, and then just focus on your own training first. And then when the opportunity presents itself, take advantage of it when it does. So Josh, hope that helps. Thanks for the question, brother.